voice is being heard back there, but then now it's also online. So briefly again, welcome, whether you're here physically or online, to this event hosted by Norad and also kindly co-hosted by NABA today. And a special welcome to the Ministry of International Development and also to our friends from MIGA and from ATI. So we are today launching 3 guarantee schemes, one with MIGA, the World Bank's Guarantee Institute, one with the African Trade Insurance Agency, ATI, and one that we manage ourselves. So what's it about? Well, first, it's about development. Still, close to 1 billion people globally lack basic access to electricity. And these schemes can be part of the solution. So, it's also about the climate. According to the International Energy Agency, energy use on the African continent will double from now to 2040. If that's mainly based on coal, it's a climate disaster. If it's mainly renewable, it's a great story about development and green transformation. And of course, for Norway, this is also about export. Because even though our schemes are always open to companies from everywhere, because we want the best and we want to, our mandate is to create development, there is also a very competitive and competent Norwegian industry in renewables, which can be part of and use these schemes. So for Norad, this is also important because it's been a lot of work. It's been inspiring and important work. Some of our best technical people have been part of setting these schemes up, and I'm very proud of the work they've done. So please join me in applauding our experts that's been part of the team. And it's about the strategy we have, that every krone that we get from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Climate and Environment to manage, we should get as much development as possible out of it. And one of the things we do with that is to mobilize even more private capital to investments in the global south. It's not possible to reach the SDGs without mobilizing a lot more investments on top of the really important work that development assistance is doing. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce the next speaker. Everything I've said now and we talked about, we do on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and more specifically on behalf of the Minister of International Development, my boss. It's now my pleasure to welcome Minister of International Development, Anne Beate Tvinnereim, to the stage. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Bård Vegar, and dear friends, dear Vice President Ethiopies, Chief Executive Officer Manuel. There you are. Good morning. Dear friends, it truly is. Is this better? No. I turned it on. Is that better? Should be on now. Yeah. Is it on? Okay. Great. So I'll start again. Dear friends, good morning. It is such a pleasure to welcome you all to the launch of Norway's support to renewable energy guarantees in developing countries. The initiative itself was signed at the COP26 November last year, and I would like to extend my apologies on behalf of Jan Christian Vestre, our Minister of Trade and Industry, who truly wanted to be here. We have been looking forward to this event together, and this is something he really has his heart into. And I am sure that we will have other opportunities to act as twins at these events, because this is a huge priority for our government and something that my colleague Vestre is very engaged in. Unfortunately, he fell ill this morning. I'm going to some of your some surprise perhaps. I'm going to start this morning by quoting Lenin, the Russian revolutionary. And don't be scared, but he said, "Communism is Soviet power plus the electrification of the whole country." And communism is not exactly what we're aiming at this morning, but I think you get my points. There is such a tremendous, transformative power in access to abundant energy. And Norway's history is a testimony to just that. We started developing our hydroelectric power more than 100 years ago, which unleashed a fundamental change of what was back then a quite poor agrarian society. And today, access to increased access to energy is just as crucial for reaching the SDGs as it was for the Norwegian development. Without private sector on board on this transformation, we will not reach our energy goals. And to get the private sector on board, we need to lower risks, and which is exactly what this initiative is aiming at. Since COP26, we have witnessed how the pressing threat of climate change is just further complicating many other challenges that we see around the world. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has just underlined the need for energy security. And at the same time as all of this is happening and the world is becoming such an unsecure place, we need to hold on to our climate goals, which in turn makes increased investments in renewable energy just so much more important. Globally, the energy sector is the primary source of greenhouse gas emissions, which it accounts for some 2/3 of all emissions. At the same time, we know that 700 million people around the world still lack access to energy. It will not be possible to motivate developing countries to reduce their emissions unless we at the same time secure their ability to develop their basic services, healthcare, electricity, etc. So providing more renewable energy is key. We have already started the collaboration with international guarantee institutions such as ATI and MIGA, and a subsidy scheme for guarantee and risk premiums is in place. Today we will hear more about the first guarantee agreements that will be dispersed. So that's very exciting. And having a partnership with these reputable institutions, we will be able to close some of the gaps in today's guarantee markets. And we will do that by making guarantee products more accessible and tailored to the needs of companies such as yours that are willing to invest, including companies from Norway. With a budget up to 1.2 billion Norwegian crowns, this initiative will trigger major investments in renewable energy in developing countries using relatively small amounts of aid funding. And that's the genius. And I'm sure that there are huge opportunities for Norwegian innovations and solutions in this process. I'm very glad that so many business representatives are with us here today. online and here in the audience, together with some key Norwegian governmental agencies involved in the facilitation and in the implementation of the work ahead. So I hope today's seminar will give you a good opportunity to learn from the industry what is needed to take an active part in this initiative and to really exchange some operative concrete advice on how we can cooperate further. And I look forward to that dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister. So we'll do a round of questions now. Please have a seat. With the Minister, which I will moderate. I know already that Scatec Solar or Scatec has asked to have a question. There will be a microphone that will be carried around, so just please give me a hint by waving your hand if you want to take the floor. You can ask the question just by raising up and do it from the floor. And then we'll address questions to the Minister in English, please. And I will also take the opportunity to participate in the conversation. So please, the first question.
And now from Scatec, heading up public affairs and support mechanisms in business development. And first of all, I just want to thank the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs for taking this ambitious initiative in terms of strengthening guarantee access in emerging markets to cover the energy needs of the most vulnerable and abundant. I think there's been a very positive development in Norad over the last couple of years in terms of strengthening the focus on public-private partnerships to really respond to the combined crises of increasing energy needs, poverty, and the climate crisis. And what I just wanted to highlight, and which I think is an important perspective to take with us into this discussion, and I guess also a bit the background for MIGA and ATI being here today to engage with business actors, is namely the perspective that we need to keep in mind that, you know, the capital market today is more than willing to finance already bankable projects, right? What we should target is really to strengthen the bankability of the projects that, as of today, in today's guarantee market, is not bankable. So how do we do that? How do we seek to be additional in terms of covering risks that are not accounted for today in terms of enabling financing of more projects, realizing more projects? So I'm just curious to hear a bit the reflections from the Minister on that. What is sort of Norway's ambitions in that regard? How do we seek to address this through this Norwegian guarantee scheme? And maybe also going forward, how do we seek to be more additional when engaging with Norwegian or other guarantee institutions to establish these public-private partnerships? Thank you.
Please.
Thank you very much. Well, the whole ambition of this is to fill the gaps. And before the launching, or before I'm really having bad luck with the microphones this morning. Okay, it's probably me. I'll try again. Thank you. It's a great question. Before the launch of this guarantee, there was a thorough assessment by multi-consults and some other stakeholder actors, identifying some of the gaps that we see today. So that is sort of that was the starting points and the whole idea of sort of filling the gaps that you identify or that you mentioned, and this is Norway's first loss capital where we support these products through ATI and MIGA. I think it's very exciting. I think it's new to us, and I think it's really important that we continue identifying potential gaps, because our ambition is definitely to strengthen and develop these initiatives and make them improve them. And I hope that today's event can maybe help identify some of, if there are shortcomings, how should these instruments be improved? So that's really, it might not be a very precise answer, but I think we need to help each other in improving it and filling the gaps even in an even better way. But Vegard?
Yeah, I think mine is working, obviously. But no, just building on what the minister said, two of the very clear messages from the minister, from you, but also from the ministry more broadly, has been additionality and filling the gaps. Additionality, because there's always so we don't want to subsidize projects that would be bankable otherwise. We want to add private capital that wouldn't otherwise invest because of the risk. That's our whole mandate. So we always work a lot with that with our partners. And the other thing is, of course, to look for the gaps, meaning the types of projects that don't have good guarantee instruments already. We can always, of course, add also to a market which already is there. But some of these gaps, specifically smaller projects and so on, we've seen that there is a gap. And also the reason why we entered into one agreement with MIGA and one with ATI, so we saw that they had somewhat different profiles, or could give us a broader portfolio. So yes, we worry a lot about that, and that's been also, like the minister said, really important in our work here. I know also that Cuba has said before that they wanted to ask a question, and I also saw after that Terje Osmundsen from Empower wanted to ask a question.
Hi, my name is Mats Hansen. I'm the CEO of Cube Energy, and we are a Norwegian renewable energy company that mainly focuses on conflict and fragile regions of Africa. So we find these areas interesting because they tend to have very good resources for renewable energy, both solar, wind or hydro. But at the same time, these are areas where the price of electricity is extremely high, often up to $1 a kilowatt hour. And the infrastructure for delivering electricity still is to be expanded. We are very fortunate to have worked with MIGA and the guarantee mechanism for one of the projects that we are working on in Somalia. This is, I think, for us a really interesting project because even though the price of electricity in Somalia is very high, we still have about 15 years of time horizon to make the project really commercially possible. So I don't think I have to try to convince anyone that mitigating risks in Somalia is a good investment on our part, and I think it really allows us to scale up the amount of investments that we can do, not just in Baidoa where we have the project at the moment, but hopefully scale up to other areas of both Somalia and the other countries we are working in with the same mechanism. Now I think we've had a discussion in the Norwegian solar cluster for what we need to really make this or these type of guarantees even more targeted at reaching the goals related to sustainable and clean energy for all. And I think two main points there is that we need guarantees that are also applicable for smaller projects below 1 megawatt in size. And I think it's also important that we get guarantees that cover off-taker risks, and that will really allow us to enter into partnerships with existing companies that provide electricity in places like Somalia on other means, like running diesel generators at the moment. But having off-taker guarantees can really help us with partnering with them for the long term. So those were my two comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's really exciting. I'm following with great interest the Somalia project. It's really exciting, and it's a clear ambition from the Norwegian side to reach the small scale projects as well, and the small scale, the small off-grid projects. And I think that's absolutely crucial to get there in order to reach, for example, the rural areas in many of these developing countries. From what I understand, there are funds set aside in both the ATI and MIGA for innovation, for developing new innovative products of the sort. So this is work in progress. I've also been. I also know that many of you are concerned about the currency exchange risks, which has been mentioned by many, and that is something we are looking at. I'm sure that these are technical details, and I'm not the expert, but I'm sure that you can dig into that later in the speed date. But we are aware of that issue, and I'm sure that is one of the aspects we will look into.
No, I think I'll just agree with you, Minister, on that, and say that if you look at off-grid projects, for instance, we know that already through MIGA it's possible to finance some of them, and it's been also our clear ambition or challenge to ATI. We know they are working it and wanna use our resources to set that up. So that's a clear ambition from our side. And we also now follow closely the work that we know Solenergiklyngen and others are doing to identify even other gaps. So that will be part of our work, and we will work closely with you. And we're a service institution. We want to help you invest more. So how we can spend resources and fill gaps that are existing. Terje, please.
Yes, hello. Good morning. My name is Terje Osmundsen. I'm Power New Energy. First, I would like to say it's a bit special to be here today, but because if you take some years back and we started putting things on agenda in Scatec almost 10 years ago, it's actually fantastic to see the evolution, because this is not the first time. There has been important steps coming on, and it shows the kind of responsiveness which I think is very important. Just to put it in context, what we're struggling at Scatec at this time, and I think has been a driving force for a long time, has been the sovereign risk issue. Right? So the sovereign risk issue, of course, is the key, because we're struggling in Bangladesh and Mali and many places. We could not sign agreements because the governments didn't have the capacity to give guarantees. So if this initiative can help then weaker states to actually get the renewables they need without having to use their own balance sheet to reach those goals, this is a fantastic step forward. Now I'm head of a company called Power New Energy, and what we are doing is that we are financing small and medium scale, which is mainly CNI and local communities. And we have actually also a partnership. So we are now raising another $50 million to scale up a pipeline of such projects in Africa. And the clients here are not sovereign. So the challenge is different. In this case, it's not the government. It is the risk. And let me give you an example. One of our first projects was in Nigeria, in a poultry farm of about less than 1 megawatt, almost 1 megawatt project for a poultry farm. Very fantastic, forward-looking farmer, everything very well. He was very happy with the plant. And then suddenly he got the swine flu coming in from north, from Europe, or from elsewhere, killing his whole population or he had to kill the whole population of birds. There is no insurance in Nigeria for that, no government support for that. He has now to sell his buildings and everything to be able to restart the business. And of course, we are lucky to have a farmer, client who really wants to do this. But if this had been a farmer who gave up, I cannot do anymore. I have spent all my fortune. I cannot have any. In that case, the whole equity would have been lost, right? So what we are investors, not necessarily investors, but because we are trying to do is to build a portfolio of project which is big enough that we can refinance and get finance in the market for 15, 20 years going forward. And what the lenders would ask for, that's, okay, what if you have many of those farms? What happens then? How do I get paid my loan? And that is where these guarantees come in, right? Where they can play an important role, because they will never happen to all of them, but maybe if you have a portfolio of 20 projects, maybe it happens to 2 or 3. And if you can find a way to capture that risk, it would certainly have an important effect on the financing of such schemes. So just to fill the dots here, we have been, of course, having a good contact with ATI and MIGA, and we continue, but we're actually working with Africa Guarantee Fund and Norad for those kind of projects, and the target is to have a more portfolio, but of course we're very happy to play the competition. So in the sense, if the ATI can come in and offer similar arrangement, that would also be very great. But first of all, I think it's a very important initiative, but there are still lots of things to do, and I hope these examples also show that it's important to focus also on the CNI side, but of course the government, the sovereign risk ones are also extremely important. So congratulations with the work so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Terje. Yes, I think this is really, I'm really excited about this way of this, you know, this way of thinking and this way of unleashing private capital. As you were speaking, I just thought I wanted to mention that, you know, in addition, I mean, today we're here to talk about risk mitigation for private capital, but at the same time, you know, Norad and the ministry will continue to work on the regulatory frameworks of the countries we work in. We will, you know, continue to work through capacity building institutions and systems in developing countries in order to also mitigate risk on a longer term. Some of you are familiar with, or I'm sure you've heard of the program All for Development, which has been a big capacity building program from the Norwegian side for many years, which we are now transforming into energy for development with a focus on renewable energy. So that's a process we are in. So I just wanted to mention that as well, that we are thinking holistically.
Good. I also just wanted to mention, since Terje and Empower asked about this, that you actually been a user, or you received support from the last of these 3 schemes, the one we manage ourselves. So we'll hear more about the MIGA and ITI ones, but the first one we set up, we managed ourselves. It's application based, and I visited one of the projects myself just outside of Accra in Ghana, with a company called the Miniplast, which actually, I mean, they collect plastic and melt it into new plastic products. Very exciting business model, by the way. And I think you, and also alongside Norfund, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Investing via us, yes.
Yeah, right. Or they've invested via in the same project. And then you have used our guarantee premium support on top of that. So it's also an example actually of 2 of your institutions working closely together or being involved in the same project like we often do. So that's yeah, so it's a good example. Then I saw, I think, Morten from Zero, go first, please.
Hello, it's Gunn Vik from Norwegian Energy Partners. First, I want to congratulate you on this launch. It has been we have been waiting for it, and also to hear about it. So this is exciting, and it's also important that we have good projects and there are good projects in developing countries. So it's important to assist the risk mitigation. And Norwegian companies are really good at building or developing projects in a sustainable way, and I think it's very good to hear that you are looking into also this is a transition, also that means more exports. So my question goes to how will Norwegian companies be awarded these type of grants compared to others? Will we be prioritized?
Would you like to address that?
Yeah, sure. So our mandate, both Norfund and Norad, by the way, but our mandate in Norad is to create development in developing countries. So the answer is actually that no, it's not that we don't say Norwegian companies, you get the deal, or you get some kind of priority to others. You actually just have to be really, really good. And I don't think that's so bad, because my experience is that Norwegian energy companies are very, very good, and they've been really successful. If a Norwegian company is going to get support from one of our schemes, and that's also for the MIGA and ITN scheme, they simply have to be good, have the right competence, have a good project, and just be applicable compared to others. What we see is that in reality, many of those who get support are Norwegian companies. Probably, like I said before, because you are quite successful. But I think this is an important part of modern international development policy. If every country were to prioritize their own businesses, it would probably not be a good idea for international development.
But in addition, this is the reason why Jan-Christian Vestre wanted to be here today, because we know that there are so many good Norwegian companies that will be applicable for these solutions. But I wanted to add that the Ministry of Trade and Industry and we are working closely now to see how will these, the mechanisms that we have with development assistance sort of match the virkemiddelapparatet, all the other, what do you call virkemiddelapparatet in English? Sorry, it's too early in the morning for me.
Different grants and tools.
Innovation Norway and all these business support system. Thank you very much. Because I believe that there are some low-hanging fruits of making it fit better together. So that's it. That's important to look at as well. And I had a meeting with my team about that just yesterday, actually, and we are working closely with the Ministry of Trade and Industry to see that. Are there something we can do to make it fit better together and close the gaps?
Thank you. And just if I may comment, I've worked within contracts before in Equinor, and I know that what type of criteria we choose also has can alter the decision. So I hope that being sustainable will be an important criteria for these awards.
It will.
Thank you.
Two more questions. We'll take both those in a row. First from Morten from Zero, and then the last answer from the minister.
Thank you. Morten Svelle from Zero. Congratulations. It's a great day that you launched the project. I was happy to be desk officer at the Minister of Foreign Affairs during all the work that lies behind it. So I'm very happy that we have reached this point with a good agreement with MIGA and NABA. As you mentioned, Bård Vegar, we are currently working in cooperation between Zero, Solenergiklyngen, NABA and Norweb on actually giving input to the further development of this initiative. As we note that this is only one point, it's not the end point, it's a starting point of a project on developing as good as possible guarantees to promote Norwegian energy companies as well as international companies to help filling the gap for SDG 7 and the Paris Agreement. And we believe strongly that guarantees is a key issue. We're currently in the final stage of our work, so we will have a report ready early in the autumn and hopefully can share it with the minister and Bård Vegar as a point later on. But I just wanted to share, the main observation, as already has been mentioned, is that off-taker guarantees is also the key issue. It goes for household agreements, for agreements with farmers, for commercial and industrial investments, as well as investments in health institutions, schools and so forth with public institutions. So this is really a key issue for the further development. We also note that, and it goes both for distributed energy as well as net-based energy. There is some agreements in place, but it needs to be improved. We also note that guarantees that can build on pooling portfolio for smaller projects is a key issue. So we hope that will also be something that can taken along, as well as currency risk guarantees. So thank you for the good work, and we look forward for coming dialogue on this issue.
Thank you. One more.
Hello. Hi, my name is Vilde. I work for Eksfin, which is the Norwegian Export Credit Agency. I'm a bit disappointed that Vestre is not here because I was really hoping he would come up with some good words that I could hold him accountable for later on. But it's interesting to hear that you have a good dialogue, and it would also be interesting to hear a little bit more, perhaps, about what that involves. First of all, I just want to give a few comments from my side. Export financing has no development mandate. We provide financing on commercial terms, and we have to commit to an agreement that Norway has signed up for that puts some limits on what we can do. But of course, the risk appetite from the Norwegian government is something that the Norwegian government decides. And export financing can also be a very important tool in Africa. Unfortunately, it's not only about risk appetite, I think it's also about resources and targets. I'm really missing some targets for how we can contribute to enabling projects outside of Norway, not just in offshore wind. I hope that also this can be a focus. I mean, we get budget cuts. I mean, I have to speak a bit honestly now. We get budget cuts. At the same time, we're going to increase exports. We get perhaps targets of helping SMEs in Norway with working capital. But we have no targets of how to reach those transactions and help out with those transactions abroad. And of course, if you have a target that you can fulfill very easily with 2 days of work, issuing a guarantee to a Norwegian bank, giving a company working capital, is much easier than putting months of work into a transaction abroad. You know, that maybe you can realize. So of course that is a barrier as well. It's much easier to reach those targets that put on, as I said, working capital needs in Norway that could potentially also be filled by Norwegian banks. And we have no targets on the kind of help that we can do in realizing renewable energy projects. So I think that's a bit of a shame. So when you say that you are working and having a close dialogue with Vestre, can you say a little bit more about, you know, the potential initiatives and some good ideas that you might come up with, or that you are discussing?
We will be that dialogue involves straight input from Eksfin and other agencies. So I don't think I'm going to go into the nitty-gritty in this forum. But I think this just goes to prove, you know, there is a potential for innovation, both within on the Norwegian side and on sort of the agencies that lie under my portfolio. So I'm just going to, you know, take this with me, and I can assure you that I will make sure that we invite Vestre very, very soon to answer your questions, and also involve him in or inform him of these initiatives, which are sort of under my portfolio. So I think I'll just stop there, because it's I didn't really detect any question from you, Morten, but thanks for the comment.
Just a lot of bragging about what the ministry has been doing. So I think we'll have
to Eksfin.
Yeah, we'll have to round off now. Thank you so much, and give it up for the Minister of International Development, and Vebjørn will take us further on here.
There will be a 5-minute break now. So you can go to the machine in the kitchen if you want more coffee. That's the consequence of early morning meetings. So thank you so much again to the Minister of International Cooperation and to Bård Vegar Solhjell. Now we will very soon hear from both MIGA and ATI. And I will just first like to remind you that there will also be a Q&A session with representatives from MIGA and ATI afterwards, where you can ask questions also of a more technical nature. So please use that opportunity. Now, I would very much like to welcome Mr. Ethiopis Tafara, MIGA Vice President and Chief Risk, Legal and Administrative Officer, to take the floor. Thank you very much, Tafara.
Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen. And thank you to the Honorable Minister of International Cooperation, Anna Beata Tunurum. The Minister and I had the pleasure of meeting at COP26 last November, when we together launched the Renewable Energy Catalyst Trust Fund. And this is a multi-donor trust fund aimed specifically at advancing climate-positive renewable energy projects in developing countries. And it has come into being thanks to the commitment of the Norwegian government and Norad. I thought I would begin my remarks this morning with a bit of a cultural digression. I know I state the obvious, but I'll go ahead and say it anyway. When I say that Oslo is a city blessed with not only wealth, but cultural riches that are the envy of the world. From Ibsen to Munch, from the traditional to the innovative. If it can be done artistically, it is being done in this city and being done well. And there is, of course, the Oslo Philharmonic, a treasure that belongs to the world as much as it does to Oslo. Thanks to the miracle of digital technology, people from all over the world can enjoy the virtuoso performances of the Philharmonic, including the legendary 1984 performance of Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony, conducted by Maris Janssens. Now, those who know classical music far better than I have praised this particular performance of Tchaikovsky's Fifth, raving about Janssens' razor-sharp precision, his professionalism, his intensity. I wonder at the dedication that Janssens brought to bear on this particular performance, at the long, arduous labor, the coaxing, the coddling, the pleading, exhorting, he must have undertaken to unite the members of the Philharmonic behind his artistic vision. I'll confess that being a development professional, a development executive, is hard work. But to me, being the conductor of a symphony orchestra seems well nigh impossible. But then I think about the matter a little bit more. And I think that maybe Janssens had it easier than do the development executives of the world who are working on climate in particular. After all, he had one score to work from. We don't. His score was written in what is as close to a universal language as the world has ever seen, while we development executives work in multiple and complex languages. And perhaps the thing I envy him most, like all good conductors, he was an autocrat, able to unify the orchestra behind his vision, his interpretation. By contrast, there is no conductor that development executives can look to make sure that we're all on the same page. Instead, we must look to each other. Consequently, you might get the impression that the state of development assistance today resembles an orchestra tuning up before the conductor walks to the podium. To the untrained ear, it perhaps sounds like cacophony and chaos. But like an orchestra, I think there's also an excitement in the air. Within the discordant sounds, I think you can hear the promise of a great melody waiting to be realized. We're working towards harmony. And if you listen closely, you just might be able to make out some of those themes working their way through the pit. It is the promise of a great melody to be realized, indeed this imperative to find harmony that underpins this new Renewable Energy Catalyst Trust Fund that we're here to talk about today. MIGA and Norway share a deep commitment to achieving sustainable energy access and combating climate change. And the RECTF, the fund, is going to play a significant role in helping us do more to address these dual challenges. We live in a world today where you've heard 733 million people still have no access to electricity, and 2.4 billion people still cook using fuels detrimental to their health and the environment. At the current rate of progress, 670 million people will remain without electricity by 2030, 10 million more than projected last year. The decline is because the COVID-19 pandemic has been a key factor in slowing progress towards universal energy access. The truth is that globally we are battling multiple overlapping catastrophes, and indeed the effects of COVID-19 continue to ripple on many fronts. And now the world finds itself grappling with the far-reaching consequences of the war in Ukraine, including the dramatic rise in energy prices and the various serious threats to the world's food supply. Still, whatever other crises may come our way, the one constant is that climate change remains a ubiquitous and acute threat to global development. The impacts are greatest on the poorest and the most vulnerable communities. And by 2030, climate impacts could push an additional 100 million people into poverty. Honestly, it would be nearly impossible for national governments and the public sector to solve these daunting problems on their own. We have a 2.5 trillion financing gap to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and so the math simply does not add up. Therefore, we need the private sector. You have the ambition, the people, the technology, and yes, the capital. The public sector and the private sector must work together if we're to make significant headway, and the multilateral community can play a vital function in making this happen. This is where we believe MIGA's role is important. Our mandate is to unlock private capital by providing guarantees against non-commercial political risks. Our job is to support private capital as it ventures towards projects in unfamiliar destinations. One of MIGA's priorities for many years has been supporting projects that increase energy access, recognizing the direct links between the availability of electricity and the resulting economic growth and social development. Since fiscal year 17, MIGA has supported 60 renewable projects, totaling $2.6 billion in new gross guarantee exposure. And over the past 3 years, 85% of the energy projects we've supported have been for renewable power. However, there are constraints on what we can achieve. As a financial institution that is required to manage its balance sheet and safeguard its capital, we have to take a risk-based approach when considering our support for prospective projects. This is where Norad and the Norwegian government and the fund come in. What this facility allows us to do is better manage the risk that we take on, which in turn allows us to expand our reach and issue larger and longer guarantees in more places at more affordable prices. MIGA's partnership with the Norwegian government is a natural one, given how many smaller Norwegian companies there are with phenomenal experience in the renewable energy field. This fund will be available to investors from all countries, as you've heard. But this class of SME that we see in Norway, especially in small hydro technologies, represents exactly the type of highly experienced but non-traditional emerging market investor that we believe the fund can empower. Similarly, ATI and MIGA also have long-standing links and complementary tools that will allow us to work together very well. Already, the fund has caught the attention of other like-minded donors who see this as a great opportunity to support their climate agenda as well. Recently, the government of Japan committed to contribute $5 million to the fund this year, which will go towards supporting additional projects. And therefore, we're grateful to Norway for taking the lead and anchoring this trust fund and mobilizing other donors to channel much-needed funds for renewable energy access. Ladies and gentlemen, If we do this right, we can clearly leverage more pathways to achieving clean, renewable energy and support and scale them to ensure that the 733 million people have a chance to access electricity in their lifetime. If you'll permit me to torture the musical metaphor just a bit more, I think that jazz, America's unique contribution to the world of music, may have the answer. Unlike an orchestra, which depends on conformity and predictability at all costs, jazz acknowledges the individuality of its performers. It gives them license to be spontaneous, to improvise, to interpret. There is, of course, a melody, a theme, an idea that is common to the performers, but there is no conductor. There is simply a group of players on the stage, each playing his part, but contributing to the whole. When you hear it described like that, you have to think that jazz is simply anarchy run riot. And then you hear something like the 1957 recording of Thelonious Monk and John Coltrane at Carnegie Hall, and you realize that when jazz lives up to its potential, the whole is something substantially, wonderfully more than its parts. The trick is realizing that before they got there, Monk and Coltrane spent years perfecting their craft. In the United States, there's a very old joke that goes like this. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? The answer, of course, is practice, practice, practice. Although not quite so neat and not nearly as funny, the question, how do you eliminate poverty and promote shared prosperity, admits of a similar answer. Cooperation, cooperation, cooperation. Let me end by saying that MIGA has a long-standing record of cooperation and developing key partnerships. We're grateful to the government of Norway and Norad for their continued support, and we invite Norwegian companies to work with us in leveraging this facility so that collectively, in cooperation, we do more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tafara. Very excellent words. Now I would like to welcome our friends from Nairobi, Mr. Manuel Moses, Chief Executive Officer of ATI. Please, the floor is yours.
Good morning. So, it's very hard to follow such an elaborate presentation by my brother, Ethiopis. Good morning. My name is Manuel. I'm the CEO of ATI. So happy to be here. So glad to hear that there's a keen interest on Africa. First, I would like to thank the Honorable Minister for presenting and the discussion that she's led since the morning. Thank you to my Norad brother for the cooperation that we have enjoyed and we are creating together with ATI. We are so grateful because we have already started on this journey of contributing to the climate agenda. How are we doing this? I heard from the morning that liquidity risk is an issue. I heard sovereign risk is an issue. I heard co-creation is an issue. Innovation is an issue. All these are important areas. Why is it important? The 700,000 million people that are in energy poverty in the continent, I think half of that, if not more, are in Africa. So the solution for climate change has to be an African one. If we cannot fix it in Africa, we cannot fix it anywhere else. So now I'll go into my formal presented speech, otherwise my speechwriter will be very upset. So first and foremost, who is ATI? So ATI was formed 20 years ago, actually under the auspices of the World Bank Group and with the support of MIGA. So we can say our DNA comes from MIGA. And I think we should continue to collaborate. So it's not a coincidence that we are here together again. To promote, of course, trade and investments in Africa. That was the mandate of the African governments, working in partnership with the private sector and DFIs. We always knew from day one that any development challenge, be it infrastructure, energy, SMEs, there is always need for private-public partnership. The amounts involved are huge. Without you, the private sector, I don't think we can even scratch the surface on tackling these developmental challenges. Now, you heard again from the speech that there's a $2.3 trillion gap in terms of energy access alone. Without instruments that I will speak about in a minute, it is very, very difficult to even scratch the surface. Now, how do we do this? As part of our creation, we asked the governments to say, why is investment not coming in? The governments are always saying, we are not risky. We wonder why the investors are not investing in our countries. We ask you, the private sector, you say, it's too risky. So there's the perception of risk and there's the reality of risk. So our creation was to try and meet these two worlds, to say, how do we remove the perception of risk from the private sector, but at the same time also remove the real risk that the governments do present. And our institution does exactly that by being capitalized by the African governments. So they gave us capital to actually put aside, and then we use that capital to reassure the private sector that should the governments misbehave, we will pay you out, and then we go after them. I think the same DNA that MIGA is created around. And we went one more step and made it very clear that each government, as it joins, signs up into a law whereby... Is that me? Maybe I should move away. Okay? All right. So we have a de facto, PCS, or rather preferred creditor status, whereby should we pay out on a government, by law, they are supposed to reimburse us. And that is how we've kept the governments honest. So we realized, now, how do we use this tool to enable private sector to come in? We then give you guarantees. And to date, we are a little over $500 million in capital, and we are writing business worth $7 billion. So we are at least leveraging that capital 14 times. And that is the trick of guarantees, which is why I think Norad and Norway have seen that if we use guarantees, we can at least leverage this capital 14, 15 times more. Now, on the energy space, thanks again to the support that we have from Norway, 500 million kronos, this is our partnership. We believe if we leverage that 14 times, you can do the math. We certainly can do a little bit more in this space. So that's the whole promise. And again, you are the private sector, you are here. Talk to us, see how we can co-create products that help you to achieve what you need. Is it liquidity risk? You will hear from my colleague later on what we are doing on liquidity risk, off-take risk. How do we really make sure that that off-taker behaves? And if it's a sovereign, we are happy to take that type of a risk. It's very dangerous, but somebody has to do it. And this is what is making those projects happen. We are also willing to take that same innovation to the off-grid space, where the off-taker is a private sector, which is the mini-grid space. And I heard the comments from the colleagues in the room that this is a gap they are seeing. And we would like to, together with yourself, see how we can deploy our capital with the partnership from Norad to make sure that we take that risk off you and those projects become otherwise bankable. So we are still growing. On paper, all the 55 African countries are supposed to be members of ATI. So far, only 20 are, but we continue to get more and more joining. So our footprint is not as big as we would like it to be in Africa, but it's continuing to grow. So you will see from my colleague's presentation which countries we are operating in and where we can partner. But that's on the political risk side. On the credit risk side, which is where there's no sovereign involved, we can do the whole continent. So we are happy to talk to you about any country in Africa on the commercial side. Again, the innovation is important. We think that we don't know everything. You are the private sector. We are a service provider. So we want to be able to solve and co-create products that will work for you and work for the market, so that indeed we can scratch the surface on these important areas. So we are very open, very innovative. On the backside of our operation, we work with the market. So again, we reinsure our risks with the market. So we are bringing capital that would otherwise not come into the continent thanks to this reinsurance model. So we believe that we can deploy much more capital in the renewable space together. Now, in conclusion, really what we want to say is at ATI, we are happy to work with innovative ideas, push the boundaries, and co-create and innovate alongside with you to make a real impact on the continent. Because, like I said at the beginning, there is no way we can tackle the energy poverty without talking about Africa. Africa is where it has to happen, and yet, as you all know, Africa is already feeling the impacts more than everybody else, and yet Africa did not contribute to this current situation. However, it doesn't give an excuse to us in Africa not to do the right thing, so we want to grow, but in a sustainable way. So really, thank you very much for having us, and thank you again to Norad, thank you to Norway for this collaboration, and thank you to MIGA. So we need to think, all of us, partnership, partnership, partnership. I think you said collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Moses, for those inspiring words. Now we enter part 2 of the program, and that consists of 2 parts. We will have very soon presentations from Marcus Williams of MIGA and Obi Banda of ATI on what types of guarantees they are offering with Norwegian support. And after that, there will be a Q&A session for you to ask direct questions on the details of these 2 schemes directly to ATI and MIGA. And after that, NABA will help us facilitate a speed dating session where you have signed up to talk to both Innovation Norway, Eksfin, MIGA, ATI, and Norad. But before we do that, I will give you a quick overview of the Norwegian Renewable Energy Guarantee Initiative as a whole, including how it all started. So first, a little bit about the context of this initiative. As we all know, vast investments into renewable energy is needed to power the growing businesses and the growing populations of developing countries. And for a long time, stakeholders such as yourselves, such as Norfund and other climate experts, NGOs such as Zero, have been identifying guarantees as crucial for unlocking these investments. And then in 2019, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs launched a study conducted by Multiconsult with large stakeholder involvement that looked at the case for a Norwegian renewable energy support. And then later that year, then Minister Ulstein announced a Norwegian Renewable Energy Guarantee Initiative. And with the new government in 2021, with Tvinnereim, this initiative was supported and further strengthened. And actually we have the data on our side. The OECD has identified guarantees as the most effective instrument to mobilize private sector investments to developing projects. And actually in the period between 2012 and 2018, around 40% of all investments from the private sector to development was mobilized due to guarantees. And this is the Norwegian initiative in a nutshell. The goal of the Renewable Energy Guarantee Initiative is to ensure that more renewable energy projects become realized in developing countries. And we do that through 2 main legs. One is the partnership with ATI and MIGA. These are 2 established international guarantee institutions. And through first loss capital, technical assistance, and this events like this one, where you come together with these 2 institutions, we aim to improve the relevance and the reach of existing guarantees. And the second part of the initiative is a scheme administered by Norad to support guarantee and risk premiums. And after the presentations by MIGA and ATI, you will have the opportunity of ask them direct questions. Now I give the floor to Marcus Williams of MIGA, who will be presenting the MIGA scheme, which is supported by Norway, the Renewable Energy Catalyst Trust Fund. Marcus, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Very good. That's the clicker. Okay. All right. Well, good morning, and thank you all very much. We have the slides. Perfect. Okay. Thank you. So firstly, I'm Marcus Williams. I'm the global head for MIGA's Energy and Extractive Industries practice, based in Washington, D.C. And I'm responsible for originating new business in energy and extractives, and also oh, sorry, lift it up. Okay, can you hear me? Okay. So I oversee new business origination and transaction execution in this area, and renewable energy has, as Ethiopis was saying earlier, has actually been for a long time a key part of what we do. Probably 85% of the projects we work on across all our subsectors are in this area. So I'll give you a quick just background about who MIGA is, where we sort of fit into the World Bank Group, and then talk a little bit about how this trust fund is going to be useful to us, and then we've got a couple of examples of some of the projects we're working on. So okay, we jumped right to the middle. Okay. Am I doing this wrong, or we just have the well, I can start at the end, maybe. Well, anyway, let me just start because we don't have a lot of time. So, for those of you who don't know, MIGA is part of the World Bank Group. The World Bank Group is sort of divided into technically five different organizations. The World Bank, which is sort of two different balance sheets, is the part that addresses the public sector through lending, concessional lending, advisory work, economic work. We've got then two organizations that work on the private sector: the IFC, which is sort of our investment banking arm, and then MIGA, which is the guarantee arm. And all we do is work on guarantees, which keeps things nice and simple for us. Okay. And that's our sort of our mandate. I have to say, guarantees it's not the most. It's a sort of an esoteric world. A lot of people don't know about us. One of the things about the function of guarantees, and how I think that people, when they're looking to put a project together, they know they need to go to a bank and raise money. You need to get your equity, but all these other risk mitigation instruments are sometimes not as obvious. Okay, thank you. Great. So very quickly, yes, these are our different organizations. You'll see also that we were not all established at the same time. So we're sort of the youngest member of the group, arrived in 1988. And maybe just one point here is that there's a lot of work that goes on amongst these different institutions within the group. So for example, we rely a lot on the World Bank, the IBRD and the IDA pieces of the World Bank for economic analysis. They've got thousands of staff who we can rely on. They've got a lot of people in the field who've got very strong relationships with host governments. So that's very important for us. We're organized around sectors. That's sort of our primary sectoral, our primary sort of organizational structure. Infrastructure, manufacturing, agribusiness and services, finance and capital markets, energy and extractive. So that's my piece up there. And of this, renewable energy is probably our top priority. Very quickly, this is sort of our, and this echoes what we heard earlier, we do about $5 billion of new business, 5 to 6 billion a year. This is our outstanding balance sheet at the moment on the top, and this is the distribution across regions and across sectors. So energy and extractives is about 35% of our portfolio at the moment. A large part of that is going to be renewable energy. And also, you'll see that sub-Saharan Africa is over a quarter of our portfolio. I think specifically for the energy and extractives world, particularly for the energy world, the places we tend to get brought into are the riskier countries, the riskier destinations, and especially because energy projects, there's a lot of capital involved, it's long-term investment, so I think there's really a need for long-term risk mitigation. And this, I think we also sort of touched on, but essentially the sort of the premise of our business model is that host governments are our shareholders. They're also the hosts of these projects. When we come in and provide a guarantee on a project, we're essentially the way I always think of it is we're standing between the government and the company, the project enterprise, and in a sense vouching to each of them that the other guys are going to behave themselves and will do what they said they were going to do. And it works in both directions. Sometimes, we need to help the government keep the project honest and do what they have said they will do. But very often it's the other way around. It's helping the project make sure that all of the agreements and the expectations that they had when they went into these projects are in fact going to be, are going to be sustained over the life of the project. So we cover these kinds of financial, equity, debt, different forms of equity, shareholder loans, quasi-equity, and also the ability to cover, for example, EPC contracts and some management contracts. We are, I think at this point, most of the countries in the world that one would think of as investment destinations are now members of MIGA. And I think if we go to the next slide, okay, so these are, when you look at the non-commercial risks, and I think a lot of you know this, so apologies for stating what may be obvious, but when you think about the non-commercial risks that any project would be exposed to, for the most part, I think they fall into one of these four categories. Currency and convertibility, basically, if you've put money into a country, can you get it out again at the end of, either when you're sending out dividends or your debt payments, or you've sold the project and you need to repatriate your capital. Expropriation is anything that the public sector might do to interfere with the operating of the project, and it can be anything from a sort of a full-scale confiscation to something that's much more sort of subtle and nuanced, but can be very detrimental. I mean, stopping goods coming in at customs, denying visas to essential workers, removing a permit or a license, these sorts of things. War and civil disturbance is physical events that are politically motivated that affect the project, so if, for example, you have a factory and it gets burnt down, if it's burnt down because it's sort of an arsonist who's that would be considered a commercial risk and sort of bad luck in a way, covered under a different kind of policy. But if it's burnt down because there is an attempt to destabilize the country and destabilize the government, then that would be considered a political risk, and that would be, or a political event, and that would be the sort of thing we would cover here. And then breach of contract has historically been very important for the energy sector. This has been a contract, this would be a contract in the public sector and the project. So, for example, a power purchase agreement for a utility-connected power plant. It's interesting that as we move more into a distributed generation world, where you have companies that are selling directly to customers rather than through the utility, that is probably becoming less relevant as a coverage. Because it has to be between the public sector and the private sector, but it has been a very important part of what we've done in the past. And I think that this sort of goes back to what I was saying about our business model. We stand between the host country and the investors, and try to make sure that everybody's sort of doing what they have said they will do. And to the extent there are problems that crop up, then we will get involved and try to mediate, use our position to try to mediate a resolution. And it says here at the bottom, we've done close to 1,000 projects, I think, since 1988. And during that time, we've only paid 10 claims. We've only received 10 claims, actually. It's not like we've turned them away. We've received 10 claims, of which, in fact, 8 were war and civil disturbance, which is sort of the risk that you can't really unwind that. Only two were expropriation claims. So it's been a pretty good claims record. We have, however, had, as you see here, it's 17-18% of the projects that we've covered have at some point or another gone into what we would call a pre-claim status, which is, for us, it's a sort of a serious moment where we have to provision for a possible loss, we have to inform our board, and we mount a really, a campaign to try to get a project that is going off the rails back onto the rails. And most of those, some of them may still be ongoing, some of them are quite persistent, but the idea is to try to do everything you can to stop a project from actually going to the point where it in fact fails. Now, turning to the trust funds and why today is important, and MIGA does not really use trust funds too much. We have our own balance sheet, and we take on, when we issue a guarantee, we take it onto our own balance sheet, and then we will use reinsurance to lay a lot of that off. So of the 25 billion that we showed earlier, about half of that, maybe even 60% of that, has been reinsured with the private market, in fact. But trust funds are important. We actually have 4 different trust funds now. 2 that are a bit older, the West Bank and Gaza Trust Fund, which was something we had to set up because West Bank and Gaza is not actually a country, and so it's not a member. And so in order to be able to do guarantees there, we had to have a special balance sheet to accommodate that. Conflict-affected countries, as you know, and very hard to attract investment into those countries, and so special efforts were required to try to find ways to bring investment forward into those situations. We've recently set up this fund on the right here, which is to provide technical assistance to try to find a way sort of around the edges of an investment project to enhance the environment within which that project is going to be operating, and try to boost its chances of success. And then today's topic, the Renewable Energy Catalyst Trust Fund. Established at the end of last year, launched at COP by Ethiopia and the minister, and with a specific focus on renewable energy projects, and sort of ancillary activities, for example, maybe a battery project, something that will either enhance or help promote a renewable energy project. Now, it's been funded, so we got approximately $50 million US, which is coming in over 5 years, which is it's a significant amount of money. It's also sort of a drop in the bucket when you really think about the overall needs. But it's as was also mentioned, I think other donors are seeing this and are realizing that this is a strategic priority for a lot of countries in their aid programs. So I think we may be able to grow this as well. It's one of the key objectives of this is to allow us to offer guarantees more affordably, in addition to being able to give us more reach. We actually have, I think, a lot of reach on our own. I mean, there are very few countries that we would not want to go into, even on a long-term basis. But we have to, as was noted by Ethiopia this morning, we have to price to risk. And so the cost of guarantees can go up quite considerably. So this is one way to bring it down. And to the question that was asked earlier about, is this specifically for Norwegian companies? I think it was a very good answer. I think it's the projects themselves that matter. And certainly every project that we look at very carefully from many different dimensions. And we would never take a project forward that we didn't think was going to be positive for the country. I mean, the first thing we look at is, do we think this is going to have a positive development impact? And then once we've convinced about that, and for power projects in particular, how does this fit into the overall market, into the sector? After that, who's behind it is sort of a secondary question in some ways. I would say that certainly here, if we see a Norwegian investor coming forward with a proposal, we will pick it up very quickly and give it a very strong first look for sure. But it's open to investors from all over the world. Okay. So let me very quickly try to explain why this sort of matters. And one thing I would also say is that from the point of view of an investor, from any of you who are looking at projects, hopefully this is sort of invisible. When you would come to us looking for a guarantee on a proposed project, it's not like you have to separately come to the Norwegian government access this. But the way it works for us is, as an example, and there are quite a few different ways we think we're going to be able to use the funding here, but this is how it's going to have the biggest impact and be most immediately relevant. So let's say we're talking about a $25 million investment. We're asked to put a guarantee on it, and it's, let's say, an equity investment. Normally what we would do is we would go in and we'd say $25 million, yes, we can offer that, but how much of our economic capital is that going to consume? And there are all sorts of models and sort of, you know, systems that are designed to essentially look at any exposure we're taking on, compare it to the risk that is assessed against, you know, mostly the country risk is sort of the key driver there, and then you allocate a certain amount of capital to that. As you sort of go through the zero from, you know, from not all of those 25 million individual dollars are at the same level of risk. The first dollar is at far greater risk of being lost or having to have a claim paid on it than the last one. So what we do is we assign a ranking to the exposure. I mean, essentially we put in place a first loss layer. So in this case, the first $5 million that are lost will be paid out of this first loss layer, which in fact MEGA participates in, but which is predominantly funded by this trust fund. The net effect of that is that the exposure to our own balance sheet comes down very considerably. And the amount of economic capital we have to allow to underpin that guarantee is reduced, and therefore our pricing is reduced. And that's really what an investor is going to see, as they'll come to us and they'll say, we'd like to get this coverage in place in this country, how much is it going to cost us? And without this, we might be saying it's going to cost you, 1.5% per annum. With this, we may come back and say it'll cost you 0.9%. So it can make a very significant difference. So let me quickly finish on this, and then I'll hand over to Obi. So I wish we'd been able to say we had already closed a couple of deals before today, but we do have some projects that we're working on at the moment, and these I'm hoping are going to close before the end of this month, before the end of June. 3 projects in Burkina Faso, which we were looking at anyway, and this in fact is, I think, a great example of how this fund is helping. So we were about to sign, we've got these 4 IPP projects. One of them we had partially closed on last year. 3 more we're about to close on at the end of January, and then on January the 24th this year there was a coup in the country, and everything sort of paused and froze. We, with the World Bank, took a sort of a stock taking of the situation and to make a decision about whether or not we should stop, pull out, go forward, and the decision was taken that we can in fact resume doing operations there, because of course the need there is tremendous. So, and our investors want to move forward with these projects, but all of a sudden, even though we've decided we can still go forward, there is still no legitimate government in place, and clearly the risk environment has changed dramatically. So we brought in the RECTF, and that has allowed us to continue to offer this cover for long-term, 15-year coverage, and keep the pricing where it was before the coup happened. So that's one quick example. Second one is Mads' project that he mentioned earlier, which we're also extremely proud to be associated with. Somalia, I think he already explained very well, what they're aiming to do, but this sort of encapsulates part of it. It's 2.5 megawatts of power coming into an environment that is extremely stressed. And I would say that of all of the risk reports I've read on hundreds of projects probably at this point, this was, certainly one of the most eye-opening. It's a very fragile and stressed place. But this project, by bringing the RECTF in, it actually makes it possible for us to go forward for, I think, 15 years and maybe even longer against these 2 risks here, expropriation and war and civil disturbance. And I think one thing we're very conscious of, certainly I've seen over the last 5 or 6 years that I've been in this role, is just how margins for investors have come down and tightened so much. And so we're aware that every single cost that an investor, a project developer is looking at, every single dollar, euro, it matters. And so finding a way to make this cost more bearable for a project is important. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much, and let me pass back to Vemund.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Now we move directly over to the other of the two partner institutions, African Trade Insurance Agency, ATI, and Obi Banda, who will present the Regional Liquidity Support Facility, RLSF, which is supported by Norad in Norway. Obi, there you go.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks to Norad for organizing the event. So RLSF is our flagship initiative in the renewable energy sector, but it's one of 3 initiatives. So to give you a sense of how they all complement each other, I'll briefly speak towards the others, but the core of the presentation will focus on RLSF, which is the initiative that we're working on alongside Norad. So before I go into the details, our CEO touched very briefly about ATI as an institution, and I think for a lot of you to understand our business model, to understand the benefits we bring to this project, it's imperative that you understand how we operate and how we get members on board. So to start off with the presentation, I'll give you a bit of background on who we are as ATI. So first of all, we are one of the larger DFIs on the African continent as measured by portfolio size. As at the end of Q1, I think our exposure across the continent, and remember, our mandate is exclusively on the African continent, was about $6.7 billion. In terms of how we operate and what makes us unique in the African context is our credit rating of A and A stable with S&P and Moody's, and it has been that way for about 10 plus years. What underpins that is how we manage our portfolio, our good relations with our member countries. So for each and every one of the 20 member countries we have as of today, where the bulk of our portfolio lies, we are recognized as a preferred creditor in those markets. How we achieve that is through the legally binding agreements that our CEO referred to, but in addition to the agreements, each and every one of the countries pays equity into ATI at the time of joining. Why this is important is when you speak about the risk of payment, when you think about the sovereign risk that was highlighted earlier on in the sessions, one of the concerns that investors have is what leverage do you have on the government? So first of all, we have the legally binding agreements. They are required to reimburse us. But if for whatever reasons those efforts fail, we have the equity the governments have paid into ATI, and as an ultimate recourse, we can then recover the value of losses or claims paid out from that equity that they hold in ATI. So it has the effect of reducing their investment into our institution, and that has tended to work quite well in ensuring that we make timely recoveries where claims have arisen. Very similar to the graph that Marcus highlighted earlier, a lot of the times you receive a lot more claims than you eventually pay out because that leverage effect in engaging with the government, in sitting down to address the challenges, is very, very beneficial to investors. In terms of an outlay of our business, about 70% of what we do is in support of transactions involving the government or sub-sovereign entities, but our mandate extends to some elements of commercial and corporate risks. So for a lot of African governments, it's very difficult to set up institutions similar to what you have here with Export Credit Norway. The level of capital required to capitalize an export credit agency is quite challenging for a lot of African governments. So in addition to our mandate to provide political risk insurance, we also have the dual mandate of acting as an ECA on behalf of African countries. So to encourage African exporters who are selling their goods, products, and services across the globe. When you look at this map, the countries in blue are those that have completed their membership in ATI. We really do hope in a couple of years' time, or at least within 5 or 10 years, the entire map will be covered in blue. Initially, when we were founded, our operations focused on East and Southern Africa because we were founded initially following a World Bank study and under the auspices of COMESA, the Common Market for East and Southern Africa. That position has evolved. We are now under the auspices of the AU, and as you can see, gradually over time, we have grown into West Africa. The last few members that have joined are the likes of Niger, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, and Senegal as well. And we do hope that by the end of this year, we are hopeful that the likes of Angola and Mozambique might advance, if not complete their membership. The bulk of our business is in those member countries, but we can still do transactions outside of those member countries. Our risk appetite and our approach will be slightly different. In member countries, remember we have that leverage from the contracts and the equity, so we can be a bit more aggressive in underwriting political risk. outside of those member countries, we need to be a bit more selective because we have a responsibility to our shareholders. So when you present a transaction to us outside of the member countries, we can look at it, but most likely we'll be in a position to support corporate risks. So to the team that's here from Empower, when you're looking at a C&I project, we can look at that in a member country, and we can also look at that outside of our membership, because we don't need to rely on the sovereign commitments that we have in place with the government. In terms of what we do, I think the very top part here, you'll see it's very similar to what MIGA does. The products are effectively the same. There will be some differences, and that's why collaboration is extremely important, because our political risk coverage is very similar to the political risk coverage that MIGA provides. The additional mandate that we have allows us to extend coverage to commercial risks. So we can look at the risks of insolvency, or non-payment, or mere refusal to pay on private contracts. So when you're looking at a C&I project in the energy space, when you're a supplier of EPC equipment to a large mine or a cement factory, we can consider those types of transactions as well. And just for your comfort as well, I think, just to reiterate, I believe all of the presentations will be shared, so all of this information will be shared with the participants following the event. In terms of what we do in the energy sector, we have one facility called the African Energy Guarantee Facility. We have the Regional Liquidity Support Facility, and we have the Transparency too. As I highlighted, RLSF is our flagship initiative, but when you look at the challenges that developers and lenders in the room will face on a project anywhere across the African continent, the risk of non-payment is extremely important, but it's probably one of several challenges that you have to address. If you address the risk of non-payment only, but you don't address the macroeconomic challenges within that market, be it the risk of confiscation, the risk of war and civil disturbance, it's highly unlikely you end up with a very bankable project. So it's important that you find a way to put tools available to the developer and lenders which are complementary. And when you look at the case studies shortly, you will realize that there have been transactions where we've actually worked alongside our partners at MIGA, where we address one risk and they address a different risk, because ultimately the various products are extremely important to achieve bankability. Very briefly about the African Energy Guarantee Facility. So each and every time a client approaches ATI or MIGA, what we have to do to protect our balance sheet is for every dollar we underwrite, there'll be a portion of the risk that we'll share with the private market. So of our portfolio of about $6.7 billion at the end of Q1, about 20% sits on our balance sheet, and about 75 to 80% we have reinsured in the private market. Why the African Energy Guarantee Facility was set up was to allow ATI to have up to $1 billion of capacity for power and renewable energy projects. So it allows us to do a bit more in providing political risk insurance and allows us to close transactions within a much shorter time frame, because when the client approaches us, we don't need to go to the private market on a case-by-case basis. So this renewable energy specific treaty allows us to do that with a bit more capacity and with a bit more aggression in terms of our approach. Now we'll get to speak about RLSF, which is the flagship initiative that we have, and we're extremely proud and happy to have Norad on board to improve upon it. So RLSF has been split into two phases. Phase one is the original structure that we had when it was set up in 2017. In implementing it and in rolling it out across multiple countries, we realized there were some gaps and there were some inefficiencies that we could address. And luckily, with the additional funding that's been provided by the government of Norway through Norad, it has allowed us to make those changes and to make some substantial improvements to the coverage we've offered. Before I go into those improvements and changes, it will be helpful for you to understand how phase one was structured and how the improvements have been made going forward. So what RLSF does is it addresses one material risk, which is the risk of non-payment by state-owned power utilities. For most grid-connected projects across the African continent, they will have to sell their power exclusively to a state-owned power utility. So in countries such as Kenya, that would be KPLC. In countries such as Ghana, you're looking at an ECG. And in different markets, you typically have a national utility that is responsible to buy power from IPPs and thereafter pass it on to a distributor, or in areas where it's not unbundled yet, they'll be responsible for the distribution as well. Now, within the power purchase agreements that are typically signed, there's what is called as buyer payment security. So buyer payment security gives the developer, the IPP, the reassurance it requires that in the event of payment delays, and it's important, these are delays, not defaults, because typically African utilities do pay. It's just that in some markets it can take longer than in others before the payments do come through. So where you have payment delays, the off-taker is required to provide buyer payment security, either by depositing funds in an escrow account, which will stay in that escrow account for the entire duration of the agreement, or by procuring a letter of credit at their cost. Now, in a practical case, these forms of buyer payment security should cover 3 or 6 months worth of payment, which is what we've seen in most markets. Now, if off-takers, remember they don't have very strong balance sheets, are required to procure these instruments for each and every IPP in those markets, it can become very costly very quickly. And in a lot of markets, this has been a huge impediment to achieving bankability, because there'll be projects that have addressed all of the concerns, but the government is not in a position to provide buyer payment security. If they do so, they'll put aside 5 million, 10 million for one project, and they'll be required to do so for the next project. So the question then becomes, if you're looking to achieve 100 megawatts to be added in a particular country, 200, 300 megawatts across multiple regions, you'll then be looking at power utilities that may not have the cash resources to provide buyer payment security worth tens of millions of dollars. So first of all, the resources may not be there, but even if the resources are there, we need to ask ourselves, is that the most effective use of their limited cash resources? And that's the benefit that RLSF brings in. We provide the buyer payment security on behalf of the government. Initially, we did this through a letter of credit issuing bank, so courtesy of the funding from our donor partners. Originally, that was only KfW, and ATI with our own supplementary on-demand guarantees would then bundle those up and serve them as collateral to a bank, which would issue letters of credit. Because the bank benefits from our collateral, the pricing of those LCs was much lower. Instead of providing LCs for 1 year, which is market standard, they could provide a single letter of credit for up to 10 years. These letters of credit are revolving guarantees. So if you have defaults in year 1, the IPP can draw down on the guarantee, we will pay out. Provided we make a recovery, the guarantee will then be reinstated in subsequent years. So over a 10-year period, such a guarantee can be drawn on in year 1. Using those instruments I highlighted earlier, we make a recovery from the government. In year 2 and year 3, they can then come back. Touch wood, it doesn't happen, but if there's a need to draw down on the facility again, it is a revolving guarantee. When it comes to size of the projects, RLSF will probably sound very similar to the partial risk guarantees made available by the World Bank, African Development Bank. One unique feature of it is that it's mainly structured to cater for smaller projects of up to 50 megawatts in its original structure. Following improvements, we can now look at slightly larger projects of up to 100 megawatts, but our focus will ultimately be to serve small and medium-sized projects, because they find it quite challenging to have access to some of the PRGs available in the market. So a few of the projects supported so far in Burundi, the very first solar IPP in that market was only 7.5 megawatts. It's small, but in the national context, it's quite huge. 7.5 megawatts is about 10 to 15% of the installed capacity within that country. But we can also look at slightly larger projects. In Malawi, we supported a 60 megawatt solar PV. So it gives us a bit of flexibility from looking at the very small projects, which are a priority, I think, going forward. But at the same time, we are trying to improve upon the structure so that where the need arises, we can look at slightly larger projects as well. To emphasize the point, I'll highlight just two of the case studies that we've supported. The first one is Nkota Kota Solar PV in Malawi. It's 21 megawatts. It's been developed in phases. So in this particular case, the value of the RLSF guarantee was only $2.4 million. But that $2.4 million covers 6 months of revenue for the IPP, and ordinarily, the off-taker within that country ought to provide that $2.4 million available to the IPP for the entire duration of the PPA. So you're looking at 20 years. So in this particular country, ESCOM is the utility. Now, if ESCOM puts aside $2.4 million in year 1, and it has to stay in escrow for 20 years, those are considerable cash resources that could go towards transmission infrastructure, that could go towards addressing other gaps within their balance sheet. In terms of the leverage effect of what this guarantee did within this structure, so ATI provided $2.4 million worth of cover, but the ultimate capex that we're able to support, because remember, without this small guarantee of 2.4 million, the entire funding of 28.4 million may not be achievable. And this here points towards the earlier remarks made about the impact that guarantees can have. So in this case, you can see a nearly 10-fold leverage. We're providing a guarantee of 2.4 million. We've played a role in enabling up to $28.4 million of total project financing. And these are very impactful projects. You look at the number of jobs created, you look at the estimated number of people that benefit from power. With these smaller amounts in guarantees that we're able to deploy, courtesy of the funding we have from our partners, you can have proper impact across multiple African countries. The second project within the same country, and again, it's worth highlighting that before these projects had closed, Malawi had no solar IPPs. These are the very first solar IPPs within the country. Salima Solar PV was the first of the solar IPPs and only the second IPP in Malawi. The very first one that involved foreign capital, both on a in terms of the project sponsors and potentially lenders going forward should they choose to refinance. Within this project, the leverage is even greater. $4.4 million worth of guarantees, up to $78 million worth of total capex that was enabled in those transactions. This, of course, is an interesting case study because we provided a revolving liquidity instrument, but like I said, liquidity is one concern. It's not the only concern. So the project sponsors who put in equity within this transaction benefited from support from MIGA on the political risk insurance. So it shows you the complementarity of some of the tools that we have on the same transactions. Of course, as we grow this collaboration, we can do that more effectively, but this shows that on any single project, a developer might approach ATI for an RLSF type of cover to address non-payment, but at the same time benefit from PRI from our colleagues at MIGA, enhancing the bankability of the entire structure. Going forward, when the funding that Norad has made available, there are some considerable improvements we're going to make to RLSF. One of the first ones is we will no longer issue these guarantees via an LC issuing bank for several reasons. First of all, banks that are operating on the African continent, or at least the African banks, their credit rating will be capped at the rating of the sovereign. So when you go into South Africa, irrespective of how strong the balance sheet of ABSA or Standard Bank may be, their credit rating is capped at the rating of the South African sovereign. ATI as a multilateral has no such limitation. So by issuing the guarantees directly, we are then issuing an A-rated guarantee to the project in lieu of a B or a C-rated SBOC from a local bank. So that's one of the reasons for that change. The second one is one of cost. When you issue a guarantee via a letter of credit issuing bank, certainly helpful, commercially acceptable, but the bank has to charge their fees. So by issuing directly ourselves, we eliminate those costs the banks would ordinarily charge. Another one is in terms of tenor. Most banks struggle to issue letters of credit on day one for up to 10 years. Those that can, that's around the maximum period for a lot of banks on the African continent. Again, we don't have such limitations, and courtesy of the funding we're receiving from Norad, we're then going to extend these tenors potentially to up to 15 years. And lastly, it's amount of cover being provided. So non-payment is a huge risk. If you can get cover for 3 months, it's very helpful. If you can get cover for 6 months, it's extremely helpful. But we are hoping in some projects, in some markets, to offer up to 12 months worth of cover. So that, we believe, will extremely improve the bankability of transactions because developers and lenders will know that when problems arise, and over a 20-year horizon, it's possible that problems will come up. Having a liquidity instrument addressing 12 months of revenue gives you enough chance to engage with the government, to restructure where possible, to address the underlying challenges, while still maintaining your debt service repayments, while still maintaining your payments for OPEX. So the 12 months of cover, we hope, will make a material difference in the market going forward. Now, apart from these changes and improvements we've made, there are other focus areas where the funding we're receiving from Norad will go a long way. One is to effectively deploy these guarantees, you need certain expertise, certain specialists to be in place. And one of the areas the funding will go is in setting up an energy team within ATI, which we've not had, but we will develop going forward. With all that we've done and the impact we've made, we believe having energy specialists within ATI, courtesy of this funding, will go a long way in ensuring we can deploy funds in a more effective manner. Apart from that, we are hoping to develop similar instruments for the off-grid sector. So it could be C&I, like Empower is developing. And we have done that in the past. So in Kenya, about 5 years ago, one of the bigger shopping malls was looking to put solar PVs on their rooftop. At the time, It was a relatively high risk for the developer, and they approached us for cover against the risk of insolvency or refusal to pay by the shopping mall. We covered that for a 6-year period. It performed very well, and the policy expired last year. But one of the challenges we had is it's very difficult to replicate that structure on multiple transactions because of the risk allocation, but as well because of costs. Because the due diligence that our team has to do on a 1 megawatt plant sadly is very similar, if not identical, to the due diligence to be done on a 100 megawatt plant. But the difference is, for a 100 megawatt plant, if we charge $20,000, $30,000, or $50,000 in annual premium, it's acceptable and economical. But you can't apply the same pricing model to a 1 megawatt power plant. Something has to give and something has to change. Otherwise, the products will not be competitive. So that's one area where the funding will go, and one area where we hope to make some changes. On the screen now, you look at some of the initiatives and projects we supported. And apologies, the font is a bit small, but I'll just quickly run over. Apart from the projects, RLSF has been used to support initiatives. So in Benin, there was a solar tender for 4 solar IPPs. We provided RLSF as part of the bidding documents. So you address some bankability gaps at the very early stage of bidding for these transactions. So when a solar IPP is looking to submit their tender, they submit the tender knowing they can get PRI from ATI or MEGA or the private market. But they also submit the tender knowing that RLSF will be available in the event that they are successful. In Zambia, with the Get Fit program, we did something similar, and we hope to do something similar in Mozambique within the next year or two. I've spoken about the projects in Malawi and Burundi, but we've also supported projects in Kenya and in Uganda as well. Then lastly, I'll speak very briefly about the transparency too. One of the challenges in supporting grid-connected projects in Africa is, if I go through the room here and I start with Ethiopians and ask, how quickly do you think power utilities make payments to IPPs? By the time I move around and come to the front this way, I might get 10, maybe 20 different answers. Some will say they pay on time. Others may say they don't pay at all. Some may say they pay after 1 month or 2 months. So to have some alignment in the market, what you've introduced is an online platform that allows us as ATI to track how utilities are making payments to IPPs. From time to time, we'll collect that information and publish it. So the first such report we did was in Malawi about a year ago, which showed that ESCOM within that market was making payments to IPPs within the credit period provided for. Now that's extremely useful information because it addresses the gap between the real risk and the perception of high risk in African countries. Because some countries do pay, but unfortunately they'll benefit from the stereotype or the assumption that utilities do not pay. And as a developer and as a lender, you then price that into your models, and it makes projects slightly more expensive, tariffs slightly higher, and obviously the end user suffers that burden. So we hope having the transparency too in the market, it's still early stages, but we do hope that kind of credit information, which is available to some extent, but is not available publicly. So if you're a Norwegian developer going into Zambia or Kenya or Uganda, you have to do a lot of homework to arrive or to understand how quickly payments are made in those markets. By making such information available publicly, we hope to address some of those concerns, some of those questions, and hopefully allow more grid-connected projects to connect. So that's the entire presentation, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Abi. Very helpful, and I think both these presentations were really helpful because now, for the first time, we're gathered in Oslo, meeting with the companies, meeting with ATI and MEGA, and for actually to have a discussion on this, what is relevant, how does it work, how can we use it. So what we will do now is have a 10-minute Q&A session with MEGA, with ATI, moderated by myself, where you are free to ask any follow-up questions. So I would ask Marcus and Abi to please come up again. And then I hope you will get some clarifications if there are any outstanding questions regarding either the MEGA guarantee or the MEGA suite of guarantee rather, and the regional liquidity support facility. And then, yeah, we do it like this. Raise your hands, and I'll try to see who. So we start in the front here, second row to the right.
Hi, Lars Nybom, Skatech. We're an integrated IPP. headquartered in Norway. And so first, I would like to say thank you. Scatec is an early adopter of the schemes presented here, and we're proud to and thankful to have support from Norad on the risk premium scheme. So in Pakistan, we are now, this month actually, starting real construction work after a long time of having this project developed. We wouldn't have been able to do that without the support from Norad. So we think there is already a lot of good innovation, and the products are there. What we see in some countries in sub-Saharan Africa, where we are participating in tenders for renewable or solar, to be specific, projects, where we have the support of the private arm of the development finance institutions, but we get stuck somewhere. Sometimes the entire tender program gets stranded because of restrictions put by the public arm or IMF on the indebtedness of the country and the weak balance sheet of the country. So we wonder, is there, all the products are there, innovation is there, is it the communication which is failing? So again, cooperation, someone said. I think that could, well, that's a question. Is there any improvement in public and private sector arm cooperation that can help unlock investments to projects? We are quite impressed to see now that we are also having hydro in our portfolio and see how those guys and girls work to align the host high-level support from the host government, high-level cooperation within the public arm and the private arm to make this project happen. Could this be extended also to solar projects, even those are smaller and do not get the same attention? Hydro alone will not solve the climate crisis. Solar can make a huge impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I think we'll take two or three questions at a time, seeing that there are a few. I see Mark Davis, and then after that on the third row.
Thanks very much. Mark Davis from Norfund, and first off, congratulations to all the institutions for this initiative. It's great. I have a question for Marcus and Obi. Marcus, you described effectively what you're doing is using your current product range in high-risk countries at lower cost to projects and perhaps longer tenor. But will you also look at extending the product range to something comparable to the PRG or the RSFF? Or is MIGA staying away from those liquidity support initiatives? And then a question for Obi. You mentioned that you can cover the private offtake market, C&I, for failure to pay. I'd appreciate if you say a little bit more about that. Is it breach of contract, that you have to terminate the contract and make a claim? Or is it more like the liquidity facility you described here, where you can actually support the projects for shorter term liquidity problems? Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm going to let you answer those two or three questions first, perhaps starting with you, Obi.
Sure. I'll start with the easier one, I think, that was asked last in terms of what the coverage is on C&I projects. So it's a bit of both. On a C&I project, for those not very familiar with the structure, these are transactions where you're selling power to a private off-taker. So typically the concern there is in the short-term basis, will the monthly invoices you're issuing be paid? So we can cover that against the risk of non-payment. And we underwrite it very similar to we underwrite transactions for corporate credit risk or lenders lending into private entities against the risk of defaults on the invoices they issue. In addition to that, we can also combine that non-payment cover with the ultimate termination cover, which would arise in the event of insolvency of the counterparty. Now, of course, the scope of these transactions can be quite small. So typically, a lot of investors that approach us for cover would lean towards covering the risk of termination or insolvency, because the monthly revenue or annual revenue on a C&I project can be quite modest. So to incorporate the cost of insurance within that kind of coverage, which we can do, sometimes can be quite costly depending on the size of the C&I transaction. So typically most of the requests we get in the C&I space tend to focus towards the insolvency or bankruptcy risk. So we can cover it, but I think a lot of the demand, because of the scale of these transactions, will focus mainly around insolvency or termination of the private PPAs. But to answer your question directly, yes, we can do both the non-payment as well as the termination for a C&I. Thanks.
Thank you. So Lars, thanks. That's a very good question, and I think there is a lot going on. I mean, the truth though is that there has also been a lot of effort, I think, for many years trying to solve those problems as well, and it's had mixed results. And so I think, there's a reason perhaps to be skeptical. Why is it different now? But I do think that I think our sense is that there is a renewable energy has been important for quite a long time already, but it just seems that there is an urgency at the moment. I think we maybe saw it, come at COP26 last year, which seemed like the new sort of high watermark in some ways of just how much attention was being paid. I think that, as Ethiopia has talked about, cooperation is, there's always been a lot of cooperation, but there again, to me, it seems like there is much more intent and purpose behind that today, about different institutions coming together to try to find ways to sequence what they're doing and integrate what they're doing. I know, for example, as we, the World Bank Group, are looking at the distributed generation world, which is, it's very different from what we've done a lot of work with Scatec. It's different from what we've traditionally done together, the IPP model. It's clear, and I think Obi said this as well in his presentation, it's a very new set of risks, conditions, it's a new terrain, I think, for everybody. And we're certainly conscious of the fact that we need to have a different approach, to not just, Mark, to your point, different instruments, but also different procedures internally. How do we process these projects? There are more of them, there are fewer. They are just as hard. It's just as hard to do a 2 megawatt as a 200 megawatt project from a due diligence point of view. So we need to figure out how to process these quicker and more efficiently.
Go to the liquidity question, and then we can move
on the liquidity question, I think that, first of all, I don't think we'll be doing a PRG, probably. I mean, the World Bank is best positioned to do that within our corporate family. And so we work already with them, and we'll try to figure out ways to continue to do more of that. I think they're bringing the PRG forward again a bit, having maybe stepped away a little bit from that instrument for a few years. But in other respects, yes, I think we are trying to find different ways to have our product coverages fit for purpose. Certainly one of the things that's exciting about this trust fund is that we have much more of an open scope. So I think, for example, we would like to try to find a way to have some kind of a liquidity facility through the trust fund, which we wouldn't necessarily be able to do on our own balance sheet. If we can prove the concept there, then maybe there's a way we can expand that to our own sort of internal product offering. But I think there is a moment where collaboration, trying to seed the ground for projects to succeed, get the investment environment right for projects to succeed more quickly, and then to have the right instruments and tools that can be deployed that really meet the risks that developers are facing. I think there's more sympathy and sense of compulsion to get that done today than maybe I've seen certainly before. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Then we have a question there, and I would now ask you to be very short and precise, and also short and precise answers. We have a lot of interesting questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Lina Mlundhagen. I'm representing International Center for Hydropower out of Trondheim. And my question is regarding training. We provide capacity building and training for hydropower and renewable energy professionals in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. And we see that to deliver a successful project, the training of the personnel that are actually going to do the project is essential. This could be everything from project development to environmental and social issues, conflict management, operational maintenance. My question is, have you considered introducing a capacity building element or in your in your schemes to secure this, at least for our part, a very essential success criteria for the projects? Thank you.
Thank you. Then we'll take 2 quick questions from online. I know there are a couple of listeners that have interest. So can we take the online questions now, Matilda?
We have one question regarding what is the minimum investment size for the facility from GPA-HE, who is looking to de-risk UN contracts. And then there's a question on ATI experience in Tanzania and the room for portfolio growth there.
Thanks. Perhaps you go to ATI first.
Yeah, so towards the question on training, I've actually been in touch with the center in the last few months to explore how, first of all, ATI staff can benefit from that training. So as we build an energy team, certainly that should be a part of the capacity building we look to do within ATI. Towards the first question that was asked from the colleagues at Scatec, the training can go beyond our own staff by bringing on board some of the power utilities and some of the IPPs within our portfolio, and courtesy of some of the grant funding, we can help cover part of their costs and ensure that the capacity building does not lie exclusively within ATI, because ultimately, to achieve the results we want to achieve, we have to bring more people on board and make sure capacity extends beyond the organization itself. Towards the question that came online, so within Tanzania, it's one of our founding members. We've been very active for the last 20 years. In the last few years, we've been looking to re-engage with the government around power and renewables. They have some interesting tenders that have been going through for solars and wind projects, and we plan between now and the end of the year to re-engage with the government in Dodoma and in Dar es Salaam to explore how we can cooperate and make these guarantees available to them. So our experience has generally been positive. There have been some delays in certain instances, but most of those have been addressed, and we look forward to engaging more in the power and renewable sector going forward.
Thank you. And also for you?
Yeah, quickly, I think on the training, so I mentioned the new trust fund we've set up for technical assistance. I think that starts to speak to that. I think also there is training that comes through project development and project engagement, and it's not necessarily that we MEAG are particularly providing it, but it gets sort of crowded in. And one example that we've seen quite a lot of just recently has been on the gender dimension, for example. And I think that's become a key part of a lot of project sort of design and structures. And then just to the question about the project size, there is no limit or floor or ceiling. I think that probably the smallest size of project that we do is around maybe $1 million. Is about the size. We don't see too many projects that are much smaller than that. Our average is probably on the energy side. It's probably in the maybe $20 million. Probably is the average size. We've done projects so up to over $1 billion as well. So there's a huge scope, but no formal minimum.
Thank you. And unfortunately, we don't have time for all the questions, but I'm asking, do we have time for one or two more? One more. I saw someone in the back as well. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, my name is Jannike Berg and I work for Norad. I have a question to ATI. I saw your presentation, you said that you require cash collateral and guarantees. Can you please elaborate on that? Is that on behalf of the sponsors to put up the cash collateral for the ATI guarantee?
Sure, thank you. So ordinarily, before banks issue letters of credit in most African countries, and to be similar in other markets, they will need some collateral for their comfort before they can issue the letter of credit. So historically, that collateral will be provided by the government or the power utility. So under RLSF, we replace that collateral, which ordinarily the government ought to provide, by the cash, which is the donor funding. The guarantees that supplement the cash are ATI guarantees. So across a portfolio of, say, 100 million, it's possible that 50 million of that to be backed by cash collateral, the donor funding from Norad and KfW, and the supplementary 50 million will be backed by ATI's A-rated guarantees. The beauty of that is by supplementing the cash we're receiving from donor partners, we can double what we could do in certain markets. So the grant from Norad is about 500 million kroners, which is about $50 million. About 10% of that will go towards TA, but what will go into the guarantees, maybe 45 million. ATI has committed to match that with our own guarantees. So effectively, with the funding from NORAD of 45 million in cash collateral, our own guarantees of 45 million, you already have a potential portfolio of 90 million. So the guarantees are not from the project, they are from ATI supplementing the cash we have available so that the entire portfolio is a lot larger than what the cash would do on its own. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I know there are a lot of other questions, and I would really like them to be raised now. However, we have a couple of more things on the program, so I would kindly ask you to save your questions for the matchmaking sessions afterwards. Thank you for understanding. So thank you so much, Marcus. Thank you so much, Abi. Very helpful. Give them a round of applause. Please. And now we are moving on to very important final part of the segment. We have now 2 presentations remaining, one from Export Finance Norway and one from Innovation Norway. So I would first like to ask Mr. Gaute Hagerup from Innovation Norway to come to the floor. To present the products and the work of Innovation Norway. And Gaute is Direktør Spesialoppdrag at Innovation Norway. Not quite sure what that will be in English. But thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Special assignments is how we translate that. But thanks a lot for inviting me to come here and speak. And thanks a lot for a great program. Just a few words about Innovation Norway. Innovation Norway is the Norwegian government's main agency for business development, innovation and international trade. And we have a mandate to ensure business growth throughout the whole country. We have a mandate to assist small, medium-sized companies to grow and also to grow internationally. Should I have... Is it a clicker here that I can utilize? This one? Or maybe the other one? Yeah, thank you. So our main strategy is that of assisting companies throughout the whole country to take part in the green shift, take part in solving global challenges and assisting them also to grow internationally. We have a number of different financial mechanisms, but we are also very thinking much about the fact that mitigating risk is not only about money. It's not only about financing projects. It is also about doing things together, doing things in business networks, exchange experiences between businesses that have done these things before, and also making sure that there is a collaboration between public agencies assisting companies. So also a collaboration between Innovation Norway and Norad, also between the chambers of business, and so also when we have offices both in Oslo, no, both in Norway and abroad. Can you? There you go. We have 23 offices abroad and 14 offices throughout Norway. And a really important part of our work abroad is being there on the ground to assist companies in these markets. I have to copy a little bit what Eksfin said here earlier, because we also have, we are a part of the great ambition of our government of making sure there is a 50% increase in Norwegian and in export from Norway towards 2030. But we unfortunately also suffer from a little bit cut in budgets. So we have less resources now than we had a few years ago. We really, really want more resources. I'm not going to repeat that, but I'm going to talk to you about the opportunities that still are there. But just to let you know, there is a little bit of a discrepancy in the ambitions and the actual resources that we have to play with. But anyway, let's play with what we have to play with. In our strategy, we are saying that for export, it's like 3 levels of way to deliver services. We have a digital-based service, free for all. I guess for you guys interested in emerging markets, that might be a little bit too simple. It's a little bit just, you know, looking for how do you get information about RPR and different market knowledge and so on. The second level is export development for the most promising companies, where we can assist one-on-one company with special advisors abroad. But the high level service level that we are really building up now is something called the high potential opportunities. And here is an invitation to all of you, because if there is sufficient interest in Norwegian business to approach a large market opportunity, we will gather our resources if you gather your resources. And when we talk about a large business opportunity, it has to be one particular market, something happening right here, right now, with a market value of more than 500 million NOK. For example, one high potential opportunity that we have established is tunneling in Chile, because they are investing in tunnels in Chile. It could also be, of course, wind power, ocean wind power in France. And also, so if you see something of large importance, a big market opportunity in emerging markets, we would be more than happy to develop a high potential opportunity project together with you. Next, please. And just to give you an example of companies that know how to utilize our portfolio of services, have been using this long different list of services, and also used a long different list of our offices both abroad and in Norway. I would say one particular one of these schemes that I would talk about is environmental technology grant. It is not specifically aimed at emerging markets, but it is specifically aimed at financing and granting environmental and green projects, going from R&D towards commercialization. Yeah, we also have different sets of loans, innovation loans, internationalization advice, and market advice. But you can take the next one. Another great opportunity would be to join forces with a few companies and apply for business networks. That means that if you are willing and able and ready to share experiences, share opportunities together with a set of Norwegian companies, we can give you a grant to set up a small business network, a small project to work for 3 years to approach a market. But this, of course, needs to be set together with other mechanisms. Next, please. And I said that we have few resources, but we do have some. We do have one office in Kenya with 2 people. Just to give you a comparison, Sweden has 4 offices and 20 persons in Africa. Denmark have 8 people just in Kenya. We have 2 people. But despite the fact, I would really say that I'm proud of a few results that we have achieved. There was this delegation to Kenya this March, organized by a program called Enterprise Development for Jobs at Norad. Our job in that was to mobilize and join forces with the program and bring companies down. We had a total of 20 participants representing these 11 companies that you see here, meeting a total of 50 participants down there from East Africa, 7 companies and field visits, and 10 of the 11 Norwegian companies participating had reported 1 or more project leads. So we are still organizing these kinds of things, and we have really competent personnel on the ground in Kenya. And so the objective was both to explore investment decisions for companies looking to establish themselves locally in Kenya, but also to contribute to investment decisions for companies looking to do project development, contributing to local value creation. I think that part is really important in this program. Next, please. And also in Asia, we have a huge network called APAC, Norway APAC Business. That means Asia Pacific. It's organized through our Singapore office. They reach many different markets such as Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines, Malaysia, and so on. It counts 53 members from Norway and 193 members in total from Asia and Australia. Next meeting is 13th of August 2022. A membership in this platform or network will cost you 5,000 NOK. But it is a way of organizing a network and being a platform towards emerging markets. Also just want to give an example of how we have successfully worked with combining different sets of schemes. Vision 2030 is a program which, for the time being, there are no calls, but just wanted to let you know that combining this with, for example, environmental technology, we have done good projects with piloting renewable energy solutions in remote health posts in Zambia, together with LTEX, Gjertsen Energy, Differ and Bright. So these things are possible. Next, please. And finally, I would really like to talk about a very interesting program we have, which is called the Humanitarian Innovation Program. It is actually built on the idea that that humanitarian organizations can utilize their purchasing power to generate innovative solutions. So the organizations applicable for this is the humanitarian organizations, but we will organize together with them market dialogues with companies so that companies can give solutions to their humanitarian organizations and their needs. The funding goes through the organizations to the private sector, and the bids to be won go through their ordinary channels, but we will support them in their market dialogue. And there is a current call out, so if you are one of the humanitarian organizations right here, right now, there is a call with deadline 8th of August. And there is also a project now being run by IOM and NORCAP. They are going to have their market dialogue this fall. It's about access to renewable energy in humanitarian operations. So that could be of interest for some of you. So, despite the fact that the resources are scarce, I would say that we still are able to do quite a lot if we collaborate well with other players, such as you guys in NABA, Norad, and if we join forces and put our heads together, I'm quite sure we can get quite a lot out of what we do have. So please contact us, and we will find interesting solutions together with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll now give the word directly over to Eksfin and Vilde Grønn Larsen. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Always fun to go last when you are running over time, but I'm going to try to be quick. So this will be more like a teaser of what we can do, and I really hope that you will get in touch and set up a meeting with me, or, you know, I have a table over there so you can come and get my card and we can follow up with the meeting if you find this to be interesting and have more questions. Yeah, so the next one. Just very, very quickly, we are a public enterprise under the Ministry of trade, industry and fisheries. So we are managed by government decisions and also by international arrangements that Norway has committed to, like the OECD arrangement on officially supported export credits. So that puts some limits to what we can do, but we're still a fairly flexible institution, which I will come back to. Yeah, next one. Yes, so what can Eksfin offer? We can offer attractive long-term financing. We can offer very long-term repayment periods for renewable energy, actually up to 18 years repayment period, and then you have construction on top of that. We can offer very competitive terms, but they are commercial, so it's interest-bearing debt, not development. There is no D for development in Eksfin, as you can probably see. We do direct lending, pure funding, and we do also pure insurance cover. So I think compared to a lot of other ECAs, we are very flexible in the terms or the different kind of solutions that we can provide. We can also provide cover for local currency financing, which is very often a big issue in renewable energy and public sector projects, and was also mentioned as a high-risk element earlier today. No, not done. Okay. Financing from us is tied to Norwegian exports, so that's a requirement in order for us to provide financing. We have to work together with international banks. When it comes to sovereign risk, we can cover 100% of the risk ourselves, but in commercial transactions, we have to collaborate with the bank. And Eksfin is a very small institution. We are only based out of Oslo, as for now, but setting up 2 district offices, but in Norway. So we are also dependent on working with partners that has the local knowledge and are on the ground in the markets that we finance. And I think also from a risk assessment perspective, that also might benefit us all as well, even though it can be complicated to get the bank participation sometimes. Yes, and we expect higher standards related to ethical business conduct and ENS management and anti-corruption, which also has an impact on the transactions that we can finance, because this has a significant impact on the transaction costs in many of these transactions, which in addition to the risk profile can also be a challenge, at least for the smaller projects. Yes, so you can go on to the next one. Yeah, just quickly, Eksfin has a lot to offer within the renewable energy sector. We can provide a very traditional export financing, which is financing to foreign buyers. It could be corporate buyers, institutions, commercial industries. We can also do project financing, being IPPs with public off-takers. But we can also finance projects with long-term corporate PPAs. And we've also actually been quite innovative, I think, to many other ECAs in terms of finding solutions also for more technology as a service type contracts, in which you are leasing out or have contracts for leasing out or providing it as a service, you know, small solar power systems, etc. And for these systems, we're actually also taking a bit of the financial burden off the buyer or the service buyer and onto the exporter, which might be in a better financial position to take on that financing. So this is also something that can be explored to a larger extent. Yes, well, actually, yeah, I can talk about this. On top of this, we have a lot of pure guarantee products. This is a very typical, classic example of a guarantee that is very frequently used by Norwegian exporters, and that is, of course, to offload risk on guarantees related to prepayment, performance, and warranty in large power projects. We also actually have perhaps some small secrets, which is that Eksfin also offer political risk insurance. It might not be that well known, but one of the other most used products that we have is actually letter of credit guarantees, which is some of the most frequently used product that we have. And we have letter of credit guarantee framework agreements with a lot of the Norwegian banks, so that it's actually automated that they can draw on that if it is transactions in countries with high political risk. But this may not be that visible because it's something that we do with the bank. The other side of that is that we can also cover political risk on equity investments. I can't say too much about that because this is a bit, perhaps a hidden gem that needs to be undusted and can perhaps be used to a larger extent. But because it's used so little and perhaps also under-communicated, I don't really know what the boundaries and frames for our risk appetite on that is, but it is something that can definitely be tested more. As for now, we also have another guarantee, which is a tender guarantee, which is also a very hidden secret, might not be lasting for a very long time. But that is actually to encourage Norwegian suppliers to bid on tenders for development financed power projects, in which if they lose the tender, they can get 50% of the cost that they incurred for participating in that tender covered by the government. This may not last very long, so if you're interested in this, call me urgently. Yes, so next slide. Yes, so just a few other kind of points that I wanted to mention, being, reflecting on what has been discussed here today. Of course, when we talk about bankability, it's not just the risk of financial default that is an issue. Today we have a lot of other issues related to climate risk, ENS risk, compliance, etc., which also brings a big toll on this project because it incurs a lot of transaction costs and a lot of costs that the project has to take on. And these costs are not relative to the size of the project. So for small projects, this can be an absolute killer. So I do have some encouragement to those working on Norad and perhaps Norfund that perhaps this kind of support is something that you could look into, finding solutions and how to, for example, finance the environmental and social impact assessments. I think that would also be a big trigger for many projects. Yes, I know I came across as very negative on behalf of my own organization earlier today, but there is some positive sides as well. We also have a climate mandate. We do work to promote SDG positive transactions. We do not have a greater risk appetite as such, but we can be more flexible in terms and we can provide better pricing. So we actually have that mandate and we do like to participate in the green transition. Another side, which is also not known, is that we are also working on our own initiative that I think can also be one of the pieces in the big puzzle in order to enable more renewable energy. We've been working on it for several years. I came back from Nairobi yesterday with plenty of lots of meetings to try to now wrap this up and get it signed by the end of the year. But I think that can also be a contribution, not solving everything, but it is an attempt from our side as well to also enable more renewable energy in developing countries. One last thing is also that it was mentioned a bit earlier about the urgency of actually increasing access to power. I know that the Africa Finance Corporation, African Development Bank, they are working on initiatives for brownfield development of hydro. This is something that the Norwegian hydropower industry has been primarily focusing on for the last 10 to 15 years, which is also an area that I think we can contribute and perhaps should focus on to combine both the development side and expertise and also the supplier sides with good technology and good expertise for that, including training staff or technology and services into that. And that could also perhaps be an high potential opportunity, Innovation Norway. Yeah, looking into that. I have plenty of other ideas as well. So hopefully we get some leverage to focus on renewable energy in Africa. And yes, I would love to talk for another hour, but unfortunately our time is limited, so I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Vilde, and thank you so much to you, Gaute, again. I think this shows that the Norwegian toolbox for promoting and supporting renewable energy in developing countries is quite huge. And I think these two institutions, together with MIGA and ATI and Norad, can provide the support we need to get those investments in place for these projects that the continent and the developing countries desperately needs. Now, I would like to invite Naba onto the stage to just briefly explain this matchmaking session, how it will take place. You've been signed up with different partners at different time slots, so I'd invite you to come to stage and explain that. And while Naba is on their way up, I can also say that there will be some light lunch served for those of you remaining for the last part of the program. And on behalf of Norad, I would say thank you so much for your attendance. This has been extremely interesting, extremely pleasant for us. So I hope it also gave some inspiration and perhaps some contacts for the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vemund. And this is my colleague Kjersti, and I'm Mathilde from NABA. And first of all, I would like to thank Norad and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for organizing this event. Both NABA and our members appreciate this launch today. And we really think that this can contribute to the green transition in Africa. So today, now over to the action and the hands-on that you can meet up with the different stakeholders. Kjersti here is the master of speed meetings today, so she will go through every detail. And if you have any questions throughout the day, that's Kjersti that you just reach out to. So Kjersti, the floor is yours.
Hello, nice to see you, all of you. Thank you so much for the presentations and this initiative. We will start this speed meeting session some minutes late, but hopefully we will manage it either way. So MIGA, ATI, Norad, Export Finance Norway and Innovation Norway will be at